She typed, "Please don't call the police," to the wrong number. A Mafia boss replied, "Address. Now. Don't make a sound." Danica Rose's hands would not stop shaking. She sat on the cold bathroom floor with her back against the wall under the sink, knees pulled to her chest, dark curly hair loose around her face. The tiles were freezing through her thin sleep shirt. She barely noticed. She was listening to Ellis Vance move through her apartment like he owned it, which was the problem. 8 months ago she had ended it. 8 months of watching him use his job, his connections, his quiet and carefully maintained power to take everything from her one piece at a time. Her gallery contract. Her savings. Her name. His voice came through the door low and calm, the kind of calm that was always worse than shouting. "Danica. I know you're in there. I just want to talk." That was what he always said before things got worse. She had a bruise on her left wrist from the last time he just wanted to talk. She needed Maya. Maya would come without calling anyone, would just arrive and sit beside her and help her think through what came next. Danica fumbled for her phone in the dark, the screen painfully bright in the small space, and scrolled with a thumb that would not stay steady. The names blurred together. She found what looked like Maya and typed fast, each letter slightly wrong. "Please don't call the police. He's here. I need help. I can't call anyone. Please just come." She hit send before she read it back. Ellis knocked again, 3 slow knocks that sounded like a statement rather than a question. "Danica." His voice had dropped into the register he used when he stopped pretending. "You're going to make this so much harder than it needs to be." Her phone buzzed. "Who is this?" The floor seemed to tilt. Wrong number. She had texted a complete stranger while Ellis stood 4 feet away from a lock she did not fully trust. She started typing again, faster and less careful. "Wrong number, I'm sorry, but please listen. There's a man in my apartment. He's dangerous and I can't call the police. I need someone to come. Please." 4 seconds of silence. Then. "Address. Now. Don't make a sound." She could not breathe. She did not know who this person was or whether they were close or far or playing some game in the middle of the night. But Ellis was trying the handle now, slow and testing, and she had nothing else. She typed her building and floor and apartment number and added "Please hurry" because she was past the point of managing how she appeared, even to a stranger. The reply came back before she finished breathing. 10 minutes. Stay on the floor. Do not open that door. Danica looked at the thin line of light under the bathroom door and understood what 10 minutes actually meant in this particular situation. Ellis spoke again, and this time the calm was entirely gone. "I have been patient with you. You know I have." She pressed herself smaller against the cabinet under the sink, her dark eyes fixed on the door handle, and held the phone against her chest with both hands. The screen had gone dark. Somewhere beyond the door, beyond the apartment, beyond the street, 10 minutes was either coming or it was not. The handle turned. It did not turn all the way. It stopped, shook once, and went still. The silence on the other side was not empty. It was the kind of silence Ellis built deliberately, the kind that made a person fill it with whatever fear they already carried. She knew this. She had spent 2 years learning the difference between his silences the way you learn to read weather before a storm, and this one meant he was adjusting. Reconsidering the approach. Planning the next move. Ellis was never impulsive. That was what made him so difficult to fight. Everything he did was measured and designed to leave her with fewer options than she had before he opened his mouth. "You know what I find interesting?" His voice came through the door at a conversational volume, almost pleasant. "You've been fighting me for 8 months. 8 months of pretending you have somewhere to go, someone to call, some way out of this. And you're still here." Danica pressed her shoulder blades flat against the cabinet and kept her eyes on the light under the door. Her phone was dark in her hand. She was afraid to light the screen in case the glow showed through the gap. "I had a meeting with the Federal Review Board this afternoon. The fraud case is moving to the next stage. After Thursday, your accounts will be formally classified as proceeds of criminal activity. Permanently frozen. Not temporarily. You won't be able to access a single dollar. Not for studio rent. Not for supplies. Not for a bus fare. She pressed her lips together. He was watching the gap for the shadow of her feet. She had her knees all the way to her chest. And the licensing board received my letter last week. Just a concerned colleague raising questions about the authenticity of several pieces attributed to you. That's enough to trigger a full review. 14 months. During which no gallery in this city or any connected market will touch your work. She had known he was capable of this. Some part of her had kept waiting for him to reach a limit, to decide she had been punished enough. Sitting on this floor, she understood finally that there was no limit. She was not being punished. She was being erased, slowly and with great care, by a man who found the process satisfying. "I'm not angry with you," he said, as if he could hear her thinking. "I never wanted it to go this far. You made it go this far." She had been with Ellis for 14 months before she understood what he was. Not violent the way people pictured violence, not loud or dramatic. He was the kind of dangerous that wore a good suit and spoke calmly and made sure that by the time you understood what was happening, you had already lost the things you needed to fight back. She had ended it in a coffee shop in broad daylight because she had believed a public place would make the conversation safer. He had smiled across the table and said he understood completely. And then he had spent every day since proving that no place was safe and no decision she made was final unless he decided it was. She needed Maya. She tilted the phone screen away from the door and turned it on, shielding the light with her body. She scrolled, her thumb moving too fast, the names smearing together in the low light and the panic that had been sitting in her chest for hours making everything harder to read than it should be. She found what looked like Maya's name and did not stop to check. She typed the most important thing first. "Please don't call the police. He's here and if anyone calls it just gets worse. I need you to come. Please just come." She pressed send and turned the screen over to check the name she had selected. It was not Maya. She did not recognize it at all. A string of digits where a saved name should have been. Unknown number. The sent message sat beneath it looking small and completely irreversible. Ellis knocked again. 3 knocks, slower. "I'm going to need an answer before I leave tonight. Just open the door and talk to me and we can sort this out without anyone getting hurt." Her phone vibrated in her hand. She nearly dropped it. She turned the screen toward her face and read. "Who is this?" Her stomach dropped. She started typing again. "Wrong number, sorry, but please I need help. There is a man in my apartment. He won't leave. I can't call the police because he's already made sure that won't help me. Please, if you're close enough, please come." She hit send and stared at the screen and felt the particular despair of a person who has done something they cannot undo and has no better option anyway. The phone buzzed again. "Address. Now. Don't make a sound." She read it twice. Then she typed her address. Her building. Her floor. Her apartment number. She added please hurry because she was past pretending. The reply came before she had finished breathing. 10 minutes. Stay on the floor. Do not open that door. 10 minutes. From someone with no reason to come. Someone who might be nobody at all. Ellis tried the handle again, heavier this time. "Last chance," he said quietly. "I mean that." Danica put her back against the cabinet and her feet flat on the floor and held the phone against her chest. The screen went dark. Somewhere beyond the door, 10 minutes was either coming or it was not. She had nothing left to do but wait and find out which one was true. She exhaled. It was not a loud sound, barely anything at all, just the smallest release of air her lungs had been holding too long. In the silence on the other side of the door, it was enough. The handle moved immediately, not testing this time but turning with purpose, and the cheap lock gave a sound like something tearing. Danica pressed herself into the corner and looked at the door and understood with flat certainty that it was going to open. There was nothing in the bathroom she could use. She had 8 minutes left from a stranger who probably was not coming in a lock that was about to be useless. The handle turned all the way. Then the front door of the apartment opened. Not kicked. Not forced. It opened the way a door opens when someone has a key, smooth and completely certain, and the sound of it stopped Ellis where he stood. Danica heard it through the bathroom door, heard the change in the air, heard Ellis go still the way she had seen him go still exactly once before, the day a senior judge walked into a room where he was speaking and the room reorganized itself around the new arrival. This was the same stillness. The kind that meant something had entered the space that Ellis had not prepared for and could not immediately calculate. Footsteps crossed the apartment. Not fast. Not slow. Just even, measured, and unhurried, the footsteps of someone who had never needed to rush because the world had always waited. Danica counted them without meaning to. 4 steps across the entry. A pause. 3 more toward the center of the room. Another pause. Then nothing. A silence that felt fuller and heavier than the one before it, as if the room had been rearranged by the presence of whoever had just walked in. Ellis spoke first. Of course he did. Who are you? No answer came back. This is private property. I don't know who let you in, but you need to leave right now or I will have you removed. Still nothing. The silence from the other side was not empty. It was the kind a person builds on purpose, the kind that makes whoever is speaking fill it with more words than they intended. I'm a city prosecutor. I can make one phone call and have this building surrounded in less than 15 minutes. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Who are you and what are you doing in this apartment? One of the other sets of footsteps shifted. A small repositioning, like a door being closed that had been left open. Then the main voice spoke for the first time. Step away from the door. 3 words at a volume that did not need to be any louder. Danica felt them in the floor beneath her, in the base of her throat, in the immediate and absolute understanding that whoever was in her apartment was not impressed by Ellis Vance's title or his threat or anything else he had brought with him tonight. Ellis said something about authority, about consequences, about the specific kind of mistake this was going to turn out to be. His voice was still controlled, but she could hear it now, underneath the control, the thing she had never heard there before. She had spent 2 years afraid of Ellis Vance. She had forgotten that fear could go in both directions. 2 knocks on the bathroom door. Quiet and deliberate, nothing like the way Ellis had knocked. You're safe. The voice was low, spoken close to the floor, as if the person on the other side knew exactly how far down she was sitting. Stay there until I tell you to come out. She heard Ellis again, sharper, something about a phone call, about what happened to people who interfered with a legal matter. His voice moved toward the front of the apartment. She heard the front door and then she heard nothing from Ellis at all. Not his footsteps. Not the elevator. Just the apartment, quiet, as if it had simply stopped containing him. The 2 knocks came again. You can open the door now. Danica sat on the bathroom floor and did not move for a moment. She was aware that she had just exchanged one unknown thing for another, that whoever was on the other side of the door had arrived because of a text she had sent by mistake, and that the only information she had about him was that Ellis Vance, a man who had spent 8 months making himself into the most powerful presence in her life, had left this apartment without argument after being spoken to for less than 2 minutes. She did not know if that should make her feel better. She was not sure it did. She stood up. Her legs were unsteady from the cold floor. She put one hand on the sink to keep herself level and looked at her reflection. Dark eyes too wide. A mark on her left wrist where her sleeve had ridden up. Her hair loose and tangled from hours of held tension. She looked like someone who had been afraid for a very long time and was not yet sure the fear was over. She unlocked the door and opened it. He was taller than she had imagined, though she did not know what she had imagined. Broad shoulders, a dark jacket, black hair cut short and neat. He was standing far enough back from the door that she would not feel cornered when it opened, and she understood even in that first moment that the distance was deliberate. His eyes were dark and steady and moved over her once, not in a way that felt invasive but the way a person looks when they have arrived somewhere to assess damage. Two men stood further back near the walls, still and quiet, positioned without being in the way. The apartment looked exactly as she had left it. Nothing broken. Nothing moved. Ellis was simply gone. The man looked at the mark on her wrist. Then at her face. Hyun-sik Nam, he said. His name offered like a fact. Danica leaned against the doorframe because she needed something solid. He's not coming back tonight, Hyun-sik said. But tonight is not the problem. She looked at him and said nothing. The problem, he continued, with the even tone of someone having a conversation she had already agreed to, is Thursday. Danica had not moved from the doorframe. She was still holding the edge of it with one hand, her shoulder pressed into the wood, her feet on the bathroom tile. Hyun-sik had said Thursday like it was the only word in the room that mattered and then stopped talking and was watching her with steady dark eyes that did not seem to need a response from her. Just patience. The two men near the walls had not moved. Outside, somewhere below, a car passed and its headlights swept briefly across the ceiling and disappeared. What happened on Thursday, Danica said. It came out flat. She had meant it as a question. What happens on Thursday, he said, correcting the tense without making it feel like a correction. It hasn't happened yet. That's the point. She looked past him toward the front door, which was closed now. She had not heard anyone close it. She had caught only fragments through the bathroom door of what happened between Hyun-sik arriving and Ellis leaving. Ellis's voice losing its footing. A silence long enough to mean something had been decided. What did you say to him? She asked. He looked at her for a moment, not the way people look when deciding whether to lie but the way they look when deciding how much of the truth is useful. I told him what I know about him. And what would happen if he came back tonight? That's not an answer. It's the answer I'm giving you. Danica let go of the doorframe and crossed her arms over her chest. Not because she was cold, though she was, but because she needed something to hold and her own arms were what she had. She looked at this man standing in her living room at whatever hour this was, his jacket not even wrinkled, his expression carrying nothing she could read clearly, and tried to organize her thoughts into something useful. She was good at reading a room, at understanding what was present and what was absent. What was present right now was a man she had never met who had arrived in under 10 minutes after receiving a text she had not meant to send, who had removed Ellis Vance from her apartment using only his voice and less than 2 minutes of his time, and who was now standing here telling her Thursday was a problem and looking at her like he had already decided what came next. What was absent was any version of this that felt safe. You said 2 choices, she said. She remembered that from through the door. Yes. What are they? Hyun-sik put one hand in his jacket pocket, a slow and easy movement. The first choice is that you stay here tonight. I leave 2 men outside your door. Ellis does not come back tonight, but the situation he has built against you is still in place when the sun comes up and you are still in it alone. Danica waited. The second choice is that you come with me now. We deal with Thursday from a position where he cannot reach you while we do it. Come with you where? Somewhere he won't look. Or if he does look, somewhere it won't matter that he found you. That's not specific enough. No, he agreed. It isn't. She understood the lack of specifics was not accidental. He was not going to tell her where until she said yes, which was its own kind of answer about the nature of the second choice. She looked around her apartment, at the small careful life she had assembled inside it. Her drafting table near the window with the half-finished canvas she had not touched in 3 weeks because the legal case had taken all the space in her head that used to belong to color and shape. The stack of legal papers on the kitchen counter with their soft edges from being read too many times. The bolt she had installed herself on the front door 6 months ago that had done exactly nothing tonight. He said Thursday the accounts become permanent, she said. I know what he said. You could hear through the door. I arrived before I knocked, Hyun-sik said simply. She thought about that. She thought about what it meant that he had stood in her living room and listened to Ellis walk her through the destruction of her professional life before announcing himself, and she decided she did not have the energy tonight to be angry about it on top of everything else she was carrying. "If I go with you," she said slowly, "I'm not agreeing to anything except leaving this apartment tonight. Nothing else. Nothing I haven't heard yet. Understood? And I want to know who you are. Not your name. I have your name. I want to know who you are." Hyun-sik looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the city made its low continuous sound, traffic and distance and the hum of a place that did not stop for anyone's crisis. "You already know," he said. "That's why you told me not to call the police." Danica felt something shift in her chest, not fear exactly, or not only fear. The particular sensation of a door closing behind you when you have already stepped through it. He was right. She had written "please don't call the police" before she knew anything about him, because the kind of person who responds to a message like hers, who arrives in 10 minutes, who walks through a locked door without force and empties a city prosecutor of all his composure with 90 seconds of quiet words, is not a person who operates inside any system she had been taught to trust. She had known it before she opened the bathroom door. She had opened it anyway because the alternative was worse. "Okay," she said. She went to the drafting table and picked up the one small canvas she had finished last month, the only piece she had completed since Ellis began dismantling her life, and tucked it under her arm. She left the legal papers. She had read them enough times that they lived in her now whether she wanted them to or not. She picked up her phone from the bathroom floor and walked to the front door and waited. Hyun-sik opened it and stood aside so she could go first, and Danica Rowe walked out of her apartment not knowing where she was going or what she was walking into, only knowing that standing still had stopped being something she could afford. She did not remember falling asleep. The last thing she could place clearly was the backseat of a car, dark and quiet, the city moving past tinted windows and long streaks of light, Hyun-sik sitting on the other side with his eyes forward and his hands on his knees and neither of them speaking. After that there was nothing until the light. It came through glass that stretched from floor to ceiling on two sides of the room, morning light, clean and unobstructed, falling across a bed covered in sheets the color of dark slate. She lay still for a moment and looked at the ceiling, which was high and white and uninterrupted, and listened for something familiar and found nothing. No street noise. No pipes in the walls. No neighbor's television. Just a silence that had been engineered, bought and maintained at a level that normal buildings did not achieve. She sat up slowly. Her body ached across the shoulders and down the back from hours on a bathroom floor, payment coming due. Her left wrist was wrapped in something she did not recognize, a clean precise bandage fitted with a small flexible brace along the inner forearm. Someone had done this while she slept. She held that thought for a moment and then set it aside because there were too many things requiring her attention and she could only process one at a time. The room was large and arranged with the kind of simplicity that costs more than decoration does. Dark wood furniture with clean edges. A low dresser. A single chair near the window with nothing on it. No art on the walls, which she noticed the way she always noticed things like that, as a deliberate absence that said something about the person who lived here. The floor was dark hardwood, warm under her feet when she stood, heated from beneath. She was wearing the same sleep shirt she had been wearing in her apartment. Someone had covered her with a blanket and removed her shoes and wrapped her wrist and left her in this room, and the door opened without resistance. The hallway beyond it was the same language as the room. Clean lines, dark wood, indirect lighting already on at a low level. She followed it toward the sound of a coffee machine and came out into a main living space that made her stop walking for a full 3 seconds. The windows here were enormous, a continuous run of glass along 2 walls showing the city below from a height that made everything look orderly and manageable, which she understood was probably the point of building this far up. A woman in a gray suit stood near the kitchen area looking at a phone and looked up when Danica entered without appearing surprised to see her. "Good morning. There's coffee. Mr. Nam will be with you shortly." "Where is this?" Danica said. "A private residence. 43rd floor." Danica looked at the windows. 43 floors up, the city looked like a photograph of itself. "I need to leave," she said. Not because she had somewhere to go. Because she needed to know what happened when she said it. The elevator requires biometric clearance, the woman said, in the same tone she had used for the coffee. Mr. Nam will be with you shortly. Danica sat at the long kitchen island and accepted the coffee the woman set in front of her without asking. It was the right temperature and stronger than she usually drank it, and she held the cup in both hands and looked out at the city and thought about Thursday. Hyun-sik came in from the far end of the space wearing a dark shirt and charcoal trousers, his face carrying the same settled expression it had carried the night before, giving nothing away for free. He was holding a tablet. He set it on the island in front of her and sat down on the other side without pouring himself anything and without preliminary. She had already noticed that he did not use words to fill space. The tablet showed a document. Then another linked to it. She scrolled with one finger and understood within 30 seconds what she was looking at. The fraud case was more complete than she had known, built over a longer period than 8 months, which meant Ellis had begun constructing it while they were still together. Some part of what she had believed was a relationship had been the early stages of this. She scrolled further. The gallery contract reassignment was documented in language that made it look voluntary, as if she had transferred her rights willingly as part of a financial settlement. She had not done this. Had not signed it. There was a signature on the page carrying her name. Her 3 bank accounts were listed with their balances at the time of freezing. The combined figure sat on the screen in plain numbers and she looked at it and thought about what that money represented. For years of selling work she had made with her whole self. For years of saying no to things she could not afford and yes to the studio and the supplies and the slow building of something that was entirely hers. The licensing review was filed 6 days ago, Hyun-sik said. He scrolled to a new document. 14-month process. During which your professional standing is classified as pending, which in practical terms means no legitimate gallery in any connected market will exhibit or purchase your work. Danica did not speak. The warrant for Thursday is a formal asset declaration order. After it's processed, the freeze becomes permanent and the accounts are absorbed into the investigation fund. Reversing it would require a legal process taking 2 to 4 years and resources you no longer have access to. She looked up from the tablet. He planned this from inside the relationship, she said. Yes. While I was with him he was already building this. Yes. She pushed the tablet slowly back across the island and wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. The city below went about its morning without any awareness of what was on the screen in front of her. She thought about the 14 months she had spent with Ellis Vance and tried to locate the moment it had started and could not find one, because that was the nature of what he had done. It had no single beginning. It had been woven into everything. Outside this building, Hyun-sik said, you are already legally a ghost. Your accounts are frozen. Your contract is reassigned. Your professional license is under review. He did not leave you a door. Danica looked at him. And you're a door. Hyun-sik said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She started with the hallway. After Hyun-sik left and told her someone would be available if she needed anything, Danica sat with her coffee for 2 more minutes and then put the cup down and began moving through the space methodically. She had always been systematic about understanding a new environment, about walking its edges and finding where the light fell and where it did not, about learning what a room was before she decided what it needed. This was the same process applied to a different kind of problem. She needed to know what she was inside of. The hallway off the main living area had 4 doors. The first opened into the room she had slept in. The second was a bathroom, large and white, with fixtures chosen by someone who understood quality as a language. The third was a linen closet, deep and organized with institutional precision. The 4th door did not open. Not locked in a way that rattled or resisted. Just closed in a way that made clear it was not for her. She noted it and moved on. The main living space she walked now with more attention. The furniture was arranged to face the windows rather than each other, which told her something about whoever had approved the design. Everything oriented toward the view. Toward the city. As if the point of being this high up was to continuously remember the distance. There was a low shelf along one wall with a small number of objects on it, books with their spines turned away so she could not read the titles, a single piece of dark ceramic that gave nothing away, and a framed photograph turned face down. She thought about touching it and decided against it. There were boundaries in this space she could feel without being told where they were. She went through the kitchen cabinet by cabinet, not looking for anything specific, just accounting for what was present. Fully stocked in the way a hotel is stocked, with the difference that everything here was several levels above any hotel she had seen. The refrigerator held food prepared and stored in clean containers, labeled in Korean with small dates in the corner. The apartment was lived in. She had wondered about that. A second hallway on the far side of the kitchen had 2 doors, both closed in the same final way as the 4th door in the other hall. At the end of it was a 3rd door that opened into an office. Large desk, dark surface, 3 monitors off. The chair behind it was the kind a person sat in for long hours. The walls on 2 sides were shelves, books and binders, and a small number of objects she did not examine closely. She stood in the doorway, looked at it, thought about what kind of work happened at a desk with 3 monitors in a building you could only enter if your hand was already known to the elevator. Then she stepped back, pulled the door to behind her, and went back to the main room. She stood in front of the windows. 43 floors of distance made everything below look clean and organized. She could see the city grid laid out in a way it never looked from inside it. From inside it was noise and proximity and the constant pressure of other people's urgency. From up here it looked like a plan. She pressed her wrapped wrist lightly against the glass and felt the cold through the bandage and thought about her apartment and the bolt she had installed herself and the stack of legal papers with their soft edges and the half-finished canvas she had not been able to look at without feeling the specific grief of a person who has had the quiet stolen out of their life. "You've done the whole floor," Hyun-sik said from behind her. She had not heard him come back. "Every room I could get into," she said. And I can't leave without your elevator agreeing to let me." He came to stand a few feet to her left, close enough that she could see him in the window's reflection when she looked at the glass instead of through it. "I'm not your enemy," he said. "You're also not letting me leave. I'm not stopping you from leaving. The elevator requires clearance. That's a security feature of the building, not a decision I made this morning to keep you here specifically." That's a careful way to say the same thing. He was quiet for a moment. In the reflection she could see the line of his jaw, the straight set of his shoulders, the tattoo work disappearing under his collar and reappearing at his wrist. If you walked out of this building right now and went back to your apartment, or to your friend Maya's, or to any address connected to your name, Ellis would know your location before the end of the day. He has enough institutional access to track a credit card, a phone signal, a name on a lease. He has prepositioned the legal narrative against you so thoroughly that any official channel you try will route through something he has already touched. He paused. "I'm not telling you things you don't already know. You knew some version of this before last night." Danica said nothing. The city below continued its organized mourning. "You are not my prisoner. You are here because you chose the second option, and you can unchoose it. But I am not going to tell you that walking back out there is safe when it isn't, and I am not going to soften what that situation looks like to make you feel better about a choice that would put you directly back inside it." She turned from the window and looked at him directly for the first time since he had come into the room. His face was harder to read than its reflection. The dark eyes gave her steadiness, attention, and the particular quality of a person who is not performing patience but actually has it. "You're telling me I'm free to go," she said, "and also that going would be a serious mistake." "Yes. And you don't see the problem with that sentence." "I see it. I'm telling you anyway because you deserve an honest account of your options, not a comfortable one." Danica looked at him for a long moment. She hated that the logic was sound. She had walked through this entire apartment finding exits that were not exits and arrived at the same conclusion he had just handed her. She had known it before the coffee. Probably before she fell asleep in the back seat of his car. She was here because outside this building Ellis had already won, and the only thing that had changed since the night she hid on a bathroom floor was that now there was a different variable in the room and she did not yet know what it meant. "I need to know what Thursday looks like from up here," she said finally. Hyun-sik looked at her with something that was not quite a reaction but was close to one. "Then sit down," he said. "I'll show you." The morning moved into afternoon. Hyun-sik spent 2 hours at the kitchen island with her, the tablet between them, walking through what Thursday meant and what could be done about it. He spoke about Ellis's legal framework the way a person speaks about a structure they have studied long enough to know where the weak points are. Not with anger, not with urgency, but with flat detailed attention, the approach of someone who has already decided the structure needs to come down and is simply working out the order of operations. Danica asked questions and he answered them without simplifying, which she appreciated more than she had expected to. Ellis had spent 2 years explaining things in a way that left her slightly less informed than when he had started. Hyun-sik did the opposite. By the time he closed the tablet and told her he had calls to make, she understood her own situation more clearly than she had in 8 months. The clarity was both useful and painful in the way that real information usually is. After he left the room, she moved back to the window, the only place in the apartment that felt neutral. She stood there and watched the afternoon light change the color of the buildings below and tried to locate the part of herself that made things. The part that stood in front of a blank canvas and felt the specific excitement of a surface that did not yet know what it was going to be. She had not felt that in a long time. Ellis had not taken it in a single moment. He had reduced it the way you reduce a flame by consistently removing air, until one day you look and the fire is so small you are not sure it is still lit. She became aware of the wrist because she reached toward the glass and the angle pulled something under the bandage. She had been favoring it without noticing, keeping that hand lower, turning her body slightly to compensate, the way you do with an injury after the first day when the pain becomes familiar enough that you stop registering it as pain and start registering it as just how the body is currently arranged. "When did you last have it looked at?" Hyun-sik's voice came from the kitchen behind her. She had not heard him return. She was going to have to get used to that. "Last night was the first time anyone touched it," she said. "The wrap is loose now. It needs to be redone." "It's fine." "It isn't," he said, in the tone he used for things that were not open for discussion. "Not aggressive. Just final, the way a closed door is final without being hostile." She turned. He was already at the kitchen island with a medical kit from somewhere, the same kind of well-stocked kit she had noticed in the bathroom cabinet during her survey of the apartment. He pulled out a clean bandage and the small flexible brace and set them on the counter with the same neatness he seemed to apply to everything. She crossed the room and sat on the stool across from him. The afternoon light came in at a low angle through the western windows and fell across the counter between them in a wide pale band. She put her wrist on the counter. He sat down across from her and began removing the old bandage with careful hands, unwinding slowly rather than pulling, checking the skin underneath as he went. She watched his hands. She could not help it. They were large, and the tattoo work covered both forearms completely, dense black patterns running from his wrists up past where his sleeves were rolled and disappearing under the fabric. Up close the work was intricate and layered, some clearly old, some newer, the older pieces with the slight softening that ink gets after years in the skin. The hands themselves were steady in a way that was almost uncomfortable to observe, the way precision in someone who also carries the capacity for force is always a little uncomfortable to observe. He did not ask what had happened to the wrist. She had prepared a brief and factual account in her head over the course of the morning. He did not ask and the prepared words dissolved. He pressed 2 fingers gently along the inner forearm, feeling for something, nodded once to himself, and began applying the new wrap. "There was a group exhibition in the financial district," he said, keeping his eyes on the wrist. 3 years ago. October. A mixed show, 8 artists, held in the converted Exchange building on Mercer. Danica looked at him. He did not look up. "I was there for a different reason. A meeting in the building 2 floors above the gallery. I came down because I had time before the car arrived." He smoothed the bandage along her forearm. "You had 4 pieces in the show. They were on the east wall, which was the last wall I came to." She said nothing. She remembered that show. She had sold 1 piece that night, the one she had priced lowest because she had not yet believed anyone would spend real money on her work. She had stood near the east wall for most of the evening and watched people look at the other 3 and move on. "I bought all 4 before the opening was half over," he said. He fitted the brace along her inner forearm and secured it. "I spoke to the gallery coordinator. Not to you. I didn't want to speak to you that night." "Why not?" He looked up from her wrist for the first time since he had started. His eyes in the afternoon light were very dark and entirely steady. Because I bought the work, he said, and I knew if I talked to the person who made it I would have to come back. Danica looked at him. The kitchen was very quiet. She thought about those 4 paintings, the ones she had made in the year before Ellis, when she had still been painting with her full self. She thought about them hanging somewhere in this building on a wall she had not yet been shown. Which meant they were here. Which meant he had kept them. You have them here, she said. He looked back down at her wrist and made a small final adjustment to the brace. Yes. For 3 years. Yes. She stared at the side of his face while he examined his work. He did not look back up. He did not offer anything else. He had said what he had said and was apparently content to let it sit between them and mean whatever it meant without pushing it in any direction. You bought everything I had in the show, she said, before the night was half over, and you didn't introduce yourself. No. And then 3 years later I sent you a text by mistake. He looked up then. The expression on his face was not quite a smile and not quite nothing. Yes, he said. He did not take her there immediately. The afternoon finished itself and the light shifted from pale gold to flat gray, and Danica spent the intervening hours in the main room with a sketchbook she had found in a drawer during her morning survey. She had not asked if she could use it. It was blank and it was there and her hands needed something to do that was not thinking about Thursday or Ellis or the 4 paintings allegedly hanging on a wall she had not yet been shown. She drew without intention behind it, just marks, just the movement of a pencil across paper, and it settled something in her chest that had been unsettled since she woke up. When the light had gone mostly gray, Hyun-sik came to the couch where she was sitting and said, "Come with me," without preamble, and she capped the pencil and stood up. He took her back through the hallway she had explored that morning and stopped at the 4th door, the one that had been closed in a way that made clear it was not for her. He pressed his hand flat against a panel beside it that she had taken for a light switch and the door released with a soft sound. He pushed it open and stepped back so she could go in first. The room was smaller than the others, more contained, and the walls were a deep matte gray that she recognized immediately as a choice made by someone who understood how color affects the way you see what is hung on it. The lighting did not come from overhead but from a series of narrow fixtures mounted along the tops of the walls, angled down, warm and precise, the kind installed specifically to show painted work at its best. There was no furniture except a single low bench in the center of the room, dark wood, facing the largest wall. Her 4 paintings were on that wall. Not prints. Not reproductions. The originals, in their original frames, which she had chosen herself and paid too much for because she had always believed the frame was part of the work and you did not put a careful painting in a careless frame. She could see from the doorway the specific quality of surface that only an original has, the places where the paint sat above the canvas in small ridges, the areas where she had worked wet into wet and the colors had moved into each other in ways she had not entirely planned. She walked into the room slowly and stood in front of them. They looked better here than they had in the Mercer show. The wall color, the lighting, the spacing, all of it had been thought through with care. The 4 pieces had been made within the same 8-month period and they spoke to each other in ways she had understood while making them but had never seen reflected back properly, because the Mercer show had diluted her work among 7 other artists. Here they were alone on the wall and the conversation between them was fully audible. Hyun-sik came to stand beside her, a few feet to her right, at a distance that felt considered. The first one, he said, indicating the leftmost canvas, a large piece, mostly deep blue with a horizontal movement of warm ochre crossing the lower third, is called Leavings. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the painting. That's the title, yes, she said. You made it in February. 3 years ago February, before the Mercer show. She had told no one the dates. They had not been listed in the exhibition materials. He had found that out separately or had paid enough attention to the work to understand from its interior when it had been made. When I saw it, he said, still looking at the painting, I thought it was about the decision to leave something before it leaves you. The ochre moving through the blue. Something warm refusing to be entirely absorbed. Danica looked at the painting. That was not wrong. The second one, he said, moving to the next canvas, smaller, almost square, dense black surface with narrow lines of raw white cutting upward from the bottom edge, you called architecture of a held breath. Yes. I thought that one was about endurance. About the internal structure a person builds to stay upright when the external structure has failed. He paused. I was standing in front of it for a long time. She was watching the side of his face and thinking about the fact that this man had stood in a gallery 3 years ago in front of work she had made alone in her studio and had understood things about it that she had never written down anywhere. He moved to the third, a wide horizontal piece, warm browns and a complicated red she had mixed and remixed over 2 weeks until it was exactly the color she needed. Weight of a common thing, he said. Yes. I kept coming back to the red. It took me several weeks to understand it. It was not a color about violence. It was a color about love that has been carried too long by one person. The room was very quiet. The warm light from the fixtures fell across all 4 canvases and across both of them standing in front of them, and Danica was aware of her own breathing in a way she usually was not. And the 4th, he said. The 4th was the smallest, nearly square, a field of warm gray with a single vertical mark in deep brown running from top to bottom off center, slightly right of where a center line would fall. Remainder, she said, because she did not need him to tell her that one. I bought that one first, he said. Before I went back for the other 3. I looked at it and knew that whoever made it was someone I needed to understand. He turned from the painting and looked at her directly. I have thought about the person who made these 4 things for 3 years. I bought them because I wanted them near me. I did not seek you out because you were not mine to seek out. You were living your life and I had no claim on any part of it. Something moved in his voice, underneath the evenness, something that had been present in the room since she walked in and was only now being allowed to surface. And then you sent me a text in the middle of the night asking me not to call the police. Danica looked at him. You said it was a wrong number, she said slowly. Every number is the right number, he said, if the call arrives. She turned back to the 4 paintings. Her own work looking back at her from a room she had never been in a building she could not leave, beside a man she had not known existed 4 days ago. She thought about the word accident and how it assumed that things happened without direction, that a misdirected text in the dark was purely the result of a thumb moving too fast in bad light. She thought about the 4 paintings and the 3 years they had spent on this wall and the particular quality of attention that had put them here and kept them here and lit them correctly, and understood, slowly and with certainty, what the red in the 3rd one meant. She had not texted the wrong number. She had simply not known, until now, which number was right. She did not mean to still be awake at midnight. The evening had passed in a way that felt almost ordinary, which was its own kind of strange. They had eaten at the kitchen island, and the quiet that had settled between them since the painting room was different from the careful silence of the first night. Less guarded. More like the quiet between 2 people who have said something real and are letting it exist without immediately covering it with more words. He had asked about the sketchbook, what she had been drawing, and she had said just marks, just the hand needing to move, and he had nodded like that was a complete answer. She had gone to bed at a reasonable hour. She had lain on the wide slate-colored bed and listened to the engineered silence and had fallen most of the way toward sleep before something pulled her back. Not a sound. Not a thought about Thursday, though Thursday was still there in the back of her mind like a low-grade pressure behind the eyes. Just the particular alertness of a nervous system that has been operating at crisis level for 8 months and does not fully trust the absence of immediate threat. Her body kept waking itself up to check. At some point past midnight she gave up. She pulled on a zip-up she had found in the closet and went out into the hallway in bare feet, moving quietly out of habit. The main room was dim, lit only by the city coming through the windows. She stood at the glass for a while and then got a glass of water from the kitchen and stood at the island drinking it and noticed that the far hallway had a thin line of light showing under the last door on the left. The study. The room with the 3 monitors and the walls of binders that she had stepped back from during her morning survey because it had the quality of a room that knows what it contains and is not interested in being examined by strangers. She should have gone back to bed. She walked down the hallway instead, not quickly, not with any specific intention, just the same pull that had taken her to the painting room and to every closed door in the apartment. The need to understand the full dimensions of a space before she could be still inside it. The door was open by a few inches, enough that the light fell in a narrow bar across the hallway floor. She stopped before she reached it, still far enough back that she was in the dark, and looked through the gap. Hyun-sik was at the desk. All three monitors were on, their light covering his face and the front of his dark shirt in the blue-white color of screens in a dark room. He had a phone to his ear and he was speaking in Korean, low and continuous, not the careful measured speech she had heard during the day but something faster and more clipped, the speech of a person who does not need to think about how they are being heard. His other hand moved across one of the keyboards, pulling something up on the left screen, then the right, cross-referencing. His face was the part that stopped her. She had spent several days learning his expressions, the steadiness, the controlled quality, the thing he let rise to the surface only occasionally. What was on his face right now was none of those. There was nothing on his face. Not calm, because calm implies something being held in place. This was absence. The expression of a person who has removed everything that was not functional, leaving only pure and efficient purpose, a machine that happened to be made of a person. She watched him end one call and begin another without a pause, the transition seamless, his voice changing register slightly. His hand moved and something on the center screen changed. She watched him look at it and make a decision in approximately 4 seconds and act on it with 2 keystrokes and move on. Whatever the next thing was, it produced the same process. Look, decide, act, move. No hesitation. No visible wait. She understood what she was looking at. She had understood it in pieces since the night he walked through her apartment door, and those pieces had been assembling themselves into a picture she had been allowing to stay slightly out of focus because full focus would require a decision she was not yet ready to make. What she was looking at through this door was the picture in focus. A man who ran something large and dangerous with the same quiet efficiency he applied to redressing a wrist injury or lighting a room of paintings. She must have moved. She was not aware of making a sound, but she must have shifted her weight because he looked up from the screen and directly at the door. Directly at her, though she was in the dark and he was in the light. His face changed. She was not prepared for it. The absence left and something came back, not the controlled steadiness she was used to but something less managed, something that responded to her presence at the door the way a room responds to someone opening a window, a change in internal pressure. He said something into the phone and ended the call and stood up. She did not move away. She waited while he crossed the room and came through the door into the hallway and stopped a foot in front of her. The light from the study fell past him and lit her face and left his mostly in shadow. "You should be sleeping," he said. "I know." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to tell you what I am. Not a version of it. All of it. You should hear it plainly before this goes any further than it has already gone." "Okay," she said. He told her. He used plain words and did not soften the edges of any of them and did not pause to check how she was receiving what he was saying. He told her about the organization, about the scope of it, about the things it did to generate the money that paid for the building and the cars and the men who stood at walls without being asked and the elevator that required a hand it already knew. He told her about the decisions made in rooms like the one she had just been looking into and what those decisions sometimes meant for the people they concerned. He told her that the legal surface of the real estate operation was real and functional and also a surface. He told her that the commissioner who would eventually become relevant to her situation was someone he had a relationship with that was not strictly professional. He told her he had never in his adult life operated inside the systems that had been used against her, which was both the reason he could help her and the reason the help did not come clean. She kissed him. She did it before he finished the last sentence, not because she had stopped listening but because she had heard enough. The full and unedited account of who he was had not produced the result she might have expected in herself. Had not made her step back or revise the thing that had been building in her chest since she stood in the painting room and understood that she had been thought about carefully for 3 years by someone who had not asked anything in return. She kissed him because ambiguity was something she had lived inside for 2 years with Ellis, the constant condition of not knowing what was real and what was constructed, of being in a relationship whose terms kept shifting beneath her feet. She had had enough of it. Hyun-sik had just handed her every piece of relevant information without being asked, had laid out the full and honest dimensions of what he was and let her decide. She had decided. He was still for 1 second after she kissed him, a single beat of stillness, and then his hand came up and held the side of her face and he kissed her back and the hallway was very dark and very quiet and outside the city moved through its midnight without knowing or caring what had just shifted, finally and without ambiguity, between 2 people standing in the dark with nothing between them but the plain truth. The morning after had a different quality to it. Not dramatic, not changed in any way she could point to specifically, but different in the way a room is different after you have rearranged one piece of furniture. The proportions are the same, but the way you move through the space has shifted. Hyun-sik made coffee and she sat at the island, and neither of them spoke about the hallway or what had happened in it. They did not need to. It had happened and it was real, and neither of them was the kind of person who needed to circle back over a decided thing and examine it from every angle. Thursday had come and gone while she was inside this building. Hyun-sik had handled it through channels she did not have access to and did not fully understand, but the result was that the formal asset declaration order had not been processed. A procedural challenge filed by a lawyer whose name she did not know had bought time. Not a resolution. Time. The fraud case was still open. The licensing review was still running its 14-month clock. Ellis had not been stopped. He had been slowed, and Danica understood from the way Hyun-sik talked about slowing something versus stopping it that these were not the same operation. It was the middle of the second week when the phone Hyun-sik had given her buzzed on the kitchen counter. She had been given the phone for practical reasons, untraceable and encrypted, a way to communicate that Ellis could not monitor. She picked it up without particular attention and looked at the screen. A video. No message above it, just a number she did not recognize, and below the video a single line of text that she read before she pressed play. Drop the resistance or she becomes the next case I build. She knew the phrasing. She had been reading Ellis's written communications for 8 months, and his sentence construction was distinctive, measured and final, designed to land like a door closing. She pressed play. The video was 40 seconds long. Filmed from a car or somewhere close to the ground, the angle slightly upward, and it showed a street she recognized immediately because Zoe had worked at the same legal aid office for 3 years and Danica had picked her up from that corner enough times to know the exact look of it, the green awning of the dry cleaner on the left, the broken parking meter at the curb. Zoe came out of the building at the 32-second mark, her work bag over one shoulder, her head down, looking at her phone the way she always did at the end of a shift. The camera followed her. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Steadily, the way something follows a person when it wants the person to eventually know they were followed. Zoe reached her car. The video ended. Danica put the phone down on the counter very carefully. She stood with both hands flat on the surface and looked at the middle distance between herself and the window and felt something move through her that was not exactly fear. She had felt fear in various forms over the past 8 months and she knew its texture by now. This was colder and more total, the specific cold of a person who has just understood that the thing coming for them has decided to come for someone smaller and less prepared instead. Someone who went to work this morning and walked to her car without any awareness that she was being filmed from 12 feet away. Zoe was 26. She had spent the past 8 months being carefully kept outside the full truth of what Ellis had been doing because Danica had not wanted to pull her into it. She had told Zoe enough to explain the distance and the changed phone number, but not enough to frighten her, and Zoe had accepted the partial truth with the trust of a younger sister who believes her older sibling when she says she has it handled. She did not have it handled. Hyun-sik came into the kitchen from the far hallway and stopped when he saw her face. He crossed to the counter and she handed him the phone without speaking. He watched the video once, all 40 seconds, his face settling into the functional stillness she had watched through a door at midnight. He put the phone down. She doesn't know, Danica said. No. He knows she doesn't know. That's why he used her. She's the one I haven't been able to protect. Zoe will be under protection within the hour. I need a home address and her work schedule, and I need you to not contact her directly until I tell you it's safe. Danica gave him the address and the schedule from memory. He sent a message on his own phone while she was still speaking, not waiting for her to finish, the two things happening simultaneously because he had already decided and the information she was providing was just the last variable slotting into place. The protection is immediate, he said. She won't see it and Ellis won't be able to reach her. That part is done. She nodded. The cold in her chest had not moved. Hyun-sik put both hands on the counter across from her and looked at her directly, and his voice when he spoke next was not the operational voice he had just been using. It was the voice from the hallway. The one that did not manage itself. Danica. She looked at him. What do you want to do, he said, about the man who sent that? She held his gaze. Outside the window, the city ran its daylight operations without awareness of a 40-second video or a younger sister walking to her car or the particular temperature of the feeling that had settled in Danica's chest and was not moving. She thought about Zoe's face in the video, head down, unsuspecting. She thought about Ellis constructing a legal case from the inside of a relationship. She thought about the soft edges on the legal papers she had read until they fell apart. She thought about 14 months of careful and systematic reduction. She thought about the 4 paintings on the wall in the room down the hall, 3 years of someone thinking about her work with more honesty and attention than the man she had trusted had given her in the entirety of the time she had known him. "I want it finished," she said. Not heated. Not breaking. Just clear, the way a line in a painting is clear when you have finally found the right pressure and the right angle and the mark goes down exactly as intended. All of it. I want it finished. Hyun-sik looked at her and something moved through his expression that was close to the look she had seen in the painting room. "Then we finish it," he said. He gave her the rest of that day. He simply did not come back to the kitchen after their conversation, and the afternoon arranged itself around his absence in a way she understood was intentional. He was giving her time to sit with what she had said and make sure she had meant it before anything was built on top of it. She appreciated that more than she could have said. She spent the afternoon in the painting room, not looking at her own work this time but sitting on the low bench in the center and existing in the space, letting the warm light from the wall fixtures fall across her hands in her lap, doing nothing in particular except being a person who had just decided something and was letting the decision settle into the body where it would need to live. She had meant it. She was still sure in the morning when she woke and the first thing she felt was the same clear purposeful cold that had arrived with the video and had not left. Not anger, though there was anger underneath it. More like the feeling she got when she finally understood what a painting needed after a long period of not knowing. A kind of locking into place. Hyun-sik came to her after breakfast and said, "There's one more room I want to show you," and she followed him without asking where they were going. It was on the same floor, accessed through a door at the end of a short corridor she had logged during her first day survey as probably a utility space. The door opened onto a room that was nothing like a utility space. It was large, with a floor of dense rubber matting in dark gray that absorbed sound completely. The walls were bare and white. The ceiling was high and the lighting was even and sourceless. There was no equipment of any kind. Just the floor and the walls and the light and a great deal of empty space clearly designed for use. "Take your shoes off," Hyun-sik said. He had already removed his jacket and shoes. He was wearing a dark shirt with the sleeves pushed up, the tattoo work on his forearms fully visible, and he moved to the center of the room with the ease of someone who had spent a great deal of time there. "I'm not going to teach you to fight," he said, turning to face her. "That takes years and you don't have years. I'm going to teach you how to use what you already have in a situation where someone is trying to control your body without your permission. Which is a situation you have already been in." Danica thought about the night Ellis had held her wrist at the angle that was not painful at first. "Yes," she said. "The goal is not to win. The goal is to create enough disruption to give yourself space to move. 1 second of surprise is enough if you know what to do with it." He stood beside her, both of them facing the far wall. "The first thing is your feet. Where they are and where the other person's feet are. Show me how you're standing now." She looked down at her feet. He shook his head. "Don't look. Feel. Where is your weight?" She paid attention to the soles of her feet against the matting. Even. Both feet equal. That's a resting position. Not a useful one. Move your weight slightly forward, onto the front third of each foot. She did. Now you can move in any direction without resetting first. You've removed 1 step from whatever comes next. He moved to stand behind her and she felt the change in the air that his proximity created. "I'm going to put my hand on your right shoulder. Just a grip. I want you to feel what it does to your balance." His hand closed over her right shoulder, fingers over the front, thumb at the back, a firm and complete grip. She felt immediately how it altered things, how a hold in that location created a line of control from his hand through her shoulder and down through the right side of her body, pulling her weight slightly off the distribution she had just established. "Do you feel that?" Yes. That's what he's counting on. The moment the grip lands, you'll want to pull away from it. Don't. Pulling away from a grip stronger than yours makes the grip stronger. Instead, you move into it and then change your direction. You use the grip as a fixed point and rotate around it. He showed her the geometry of it with his hands before applying it to her body. Now. Rotate. She rotated. It was clumsy and she lost her footing on the second attempt, and he steadied her without comment and they went again. By the 5th repetition it felt like something she could trust. By the 10th it was beginning to feel like a language she was learning. They worked through the shoulder grip and then a wrist hold and then a hold from behind with both arms, each taught the same way, geometry first, then slow application, then repetition until the movement started to belong to her body rather than just her understanding of it. He was not a theatrical teacher. No encouragement between attempts, no framing things in terms of how well she was doing. He corrected and repeated and corrected again and moved on when the correction had taken, and the absence of theater made the whole thing feel more serious and more useful than if he had been performing patience. An hour in, he stepped back. Now I'm going to hold you from behind and I want you to get free. Both arms, full hold, across the upper body. He moved behind her and his arms came around her, crossing at her sternum, his forearms pressing her upper arms against her sides with controlled and even pressure that was not painful but was completely effective. She could not raise her arms. She could not turn. She tried the rotation principle and his grip adjusted and negated it. She tried dropping her weight and he moved with her. She tried a backward push and he absorbed it without shifting his feet. He simply maintained the hold and let her work. She tried 4 times. The first 3 produced only a better understanding of how the hold worked and why her instinctive responses were not getting through it. On the 4th attempt she stopped trying to move through the hold and instead dropped her weight suddenly and completely, not a push, just a full surrender of resistance, and the unexpected change in her center of gravity pulled his grip slightly low, and in the fraction of a second before he adjusted she turned inside the loosened hold and stepped clear. She was breathing harder than she had expected. She stood facing him and he was looking at her and his expression was none of the things she had catalogued over the past 2 weeks. Not controlled steadiness or functional absence. It was simpler than any of those. The expression of a person who has seen something that satisfied them at a level they do not often get to access, and is not trying to manage the fact that it shows. Open and direct and entirely without calculation. She thought it was probably the most honest thing she had seen on his face since the night she opened a bathroom door and found him standing at a careful distance on the other side. Again, he said, and the expression settled back into something more composed, but not entirely, and she noticed that too. Zoe's relocation went smoothly. Hyunsik's people built a cover story around a short-term consulting placement in another city, the kind that sounded plausible for someone with Zoe's background in legal aid work. Zoe accepted it with the uncomplicated trust of a younger sister who believed her older sibling when she said she had it handled. Danica had been on the phone with her directly, heard her voice and confirmed she was safe, and the call was short and deliberately light because the phone Hyunsik's people had provided was secure, but the conversation still needed to sound like a normal call between sisters. They talked about the weather in the city Zoe was being moved to and about a television show they had both been watching before all of this started, and Danica held the phone with both hands and listened to her sister's voice and felt the cold thing in her chest ease by a fraction. She told Hyunsik afterward that Zoe was settled and he said good, and that was the full extent of it, because Zoe being safe was not the end of anything. It was a secured perimeter around someone who mattered while the actual work got done. He came to her 2 days later, in the late morning, while she was at the kitchen island with the 3rd sketchbook and a coffee gone cold beside her. He sat down across from her in the way she had learned meant he had something to say that required her full attention. She closed the sketchbook. "There is a gallery on the north end of the arts district," he said. "Meridian. It has relationships with 3 major cultural press outlets in the city and a board that includes 2 people whose names appear regularly in the same philanthropic circles Ellis uses to maintain his public image." She looked at him. "He goes to their events. He has been photographed at their annual fundraiser for 4 consecutive years. He considers that world part of his profile. A significant gallery opening in that space, covered by those outlets, is exactly the kind of event his ego will not allow him to skip, particularly if the opening belongs to someone he believes he has already neutralized." Danica was quiet for a moment. You want to show my work. I want to show your work in a room full of cameras and press and people whose presence makes it impossible for Ellis to behave the way he behaves when there are no witnesses. I want him to walk in and see you standing at the center of that room and understand that the neutralization did not take. And then I want him to make the decision his ego will push him toward, which is to try to finish it publicly because he cannot tolerate the alternative. The alternative being that I simply exist in a room he thought he had emptied me from. Yes. She thought about the 40-second video. About Zoe walking to her car with her head down. About 14 months of a relationship that had been a construction project she had not known she was living inside. What do I need to make, she said. Hyun-sik looked at her with the expression that was close to a reaction. Whatever is true. Whatever you would make if no one was watching and nothing was at stake except the work. She opened the sketchbook again. The studio space appeared the next morning in the room adjacent to the painting room, the one she had not been inside before. It turned out to be larger than the painting room and equipped in a way that suggested either remarkable foresight or a phone call made the previous evening. Stretched canvases in 4 sizes lined against one wall. A full range of oils and a flat cabinet with shallow drawers. Brushes that were the right kind, with a specific weight in the hand that cheap brushes do not have. A large work table with a glass top for mixing. An easel adjustable to any angle. Good light from a skylight she had not known was in the ceiling because it had been covered by a panel that had now been removed. She stood in the doorway of the room for a long moment before she went in. She had not been inside a working studio in 14 months. She had not touched a canvas with any real intention in longer than that, because real intention required a quality of internal quiet that Ellis had been systematically removing from her life, and she had not understood what was happening until the quiet was gone and the canvases had started accumulating in the corner of her apartment empty and accusing. She crossed the threshold and walked to the work table and picked up a brush and held it and put it down and picked up another one and held that one longer. The pilot light she had felt returning over the past several days was still there. She held the brush and checked for it the way you check a small flame in wind, cupping your attention around it to see if it was real. It was. It was small but it was real and it was hers and Ellis had not taken it all the way down after all. She started the first canvas that afternoon. She did not plan it in advance. She went directly to the surface because the planning had apparently been happening in the sketchbooks over the past 2 weeks without her framing it that way, and what came out of the brush in the first hour was more certain than anything she had made in 2 years. Not finished. Nowhere near finished. But certain. Moving in the right direction with a confidence she recognized as genuine rather than performed. Hyun-sik appeared in the doorway that evening. She had been aware of time passing but had not tracked it, and the light from the skylight had shifted from afternoon white to early evening without her noticing. He did not come into the room. He had a book in his hand, a physical book with a dark cover, and he looked at the canvas she was working on for one moment, just one, not an assessment, just a recognition, and then he sat down in the corridor outside the doorway with his back against the wall and opened the book. She looked at him over her shoulder. He was reading. She turned back to the canvas. She worked for another 2 hours. He did not speak and she did not speak, and the room held both of them in their respective silences, which were not separate silences but the same one, shared and full of the sound of a brush on a surface and the occasional turn of a page. When she finally put the brush down he was still there, the book open in his lap, and the corridor light was on because the daylight was long gone. She cleaned the brush and looked at what she had made. It was the beginning of something large and honest and not yet complete, the kind of beginning that promises the rest of itself if you show up the next day and the day after. She showed up. Every day for 12 days she went into the studio in the morning and stayed until the light or her body told her to stop, and every evening Hyun-sik came to the doorway with his book and sat in the corridor and read while she worked. He never commented on the canvases. Never asked what they were about or where they were going. He simply came and was present in the way that a room with good light is present, without demanding anything in return for what it gave. She had not known until now that she had needed that specific thing. A witness who made no requirements of the work. She had not known because she had not had it before. What she had had was Ellis, who observed her work the way he observed everything, as information about her that could be filed and used. By the end of the 12 days she had 4 canvases. They were the best things she had made. She knew it the way she always knew it when something was true, not with excitement but with the quiet settled recognition of a person who has done what they came to do. She stood in front of all four of them arranged against the studio wall on the last evening and felt something unlock in her chest that she had believed, in her lowest moments, might be locked permanently. Hyun-sik came to the doorway and looked at the four canvases and then at her. "They're ready," she said. "Yes," he said. "So are we." The four canvases left the apartment the morning before the opening, carried out by two of Hyun-sik's men with the kind of careful handling that told Danica someone had given specific instructions about transport. She watched them go from the studio doorway and felt the particular feeling of sending work out into the world, always the same feeling regardless of circumstances, a mix of relief and exposure, the sensation of having said something true out loud and having to wait to see how the room received it. This time the feeling had an additional layer she could not entirely separate from the rest. Those four canvases were not only paintings. They were the mechanism of something larger, and she had made them knowing that, had stood in front of them every day for 12 days understanding they were going to be used to draw a specific person into a specific room, and she had made them as honestly as she could anyway because any other approach would have made them into something Alice would recognize and know how to counter. You could not use constructed work as a trap for a man who had spent 2 years learning to tell the difference between who she was and who she was pretending to be. The day passed quietly. Hyun-sik was in and out of the study, managing whatever needed managing in the hours before a plan moved from preparation into execution. Danica spent the morning in the now empty studio, which felt different without the canvases against the wall, larger and more neutral, the way a space feels after you have finished the work it was holding. She sat on the floor with her back against the work table and did not draw anything. She just sat in the room that had given her something back that she had believed was gone and let herself be in it one more time before everything changed. She thought about Zoe in another city, safe and unknowing. She thought about the four canvases arriving at the Meridian Gallery and being hung by people who did not know what they were part of. She thought about Ellis reading the press coverage that Hyun-sik's connections had seeded through the cultural outlets over the past week, the quiet and well-placed mentions of a significant return, a notable artist resurfacing after a period of personal difficulty. She thought about whether Ellis would come and decided that the question was not whether but when and in what state of mind. A man who had spent 8 months constructing the legal erasure of a woman he believed belonged to him could not read about her public return and stay home. His presence at that opening was not a possibility. It was a certainty. And an enraged Ellis Vance made decisions that the careful, constructed version of himself would not make. Hyun-sik knocked on the studio door at 7 in the evening. He was holding two things. In his right hand, a garment bag, dark and slim. In his left, a small flat box of pale wood with no markings on the outside. He came into the room and laid the garment bag across the work table and set the wooden box beside it. He unzipped the garment bag and laid it open. The dress was the color of amber held up to light, a deep warm bronze that shifted when the fabric moved, catching the studio lighting differently depending on the angle, now more gold, now more brown, now something between the two that did not have a clean name. Not a complicated construction, no excess, no decoration, just a cut that understood the body it had been made for and a fabric that did the rest. She looked at it and thought about the four paintings on the Meridian walls and how the dress was the same kind of thing, a choice made with complete intention that appeared simpler than it was. "How did you know the size?" she said. "I've been paying attention for 2 weeks," he said, which was not a surprising answer but still required a moment to absorb. She picked up the fabric and felt the weight of it and set it back down and looked at the wooden box. "Open it," he said. The bracelet inside was hammered gold, wide enough to have presence on the wrist without being heavy in appearance, with a surface texture that caught light the same way the dress did, in varied and shifting ways. The clasp was barely visible, worked into the pattern of the hammering so that you would need to know it was there to find it. "Microphone in the clasp," he said. "GPS in the band. I'll hear everything in the room and I'll know where you are every second." He paused. "I'll be in the building. Not in the gallery. Somewhere Ellis won't see me and won't expect me until it's too late to adjust." She nodded. She had known there would be something like this. He did not send things he valued into exposed situations without a line back to himself. She picked the bracelet up from the box. Warm from the wood and heavier than it looked, solid and well-made, the kind of thing that would sit on the wrist without shifting. "Let me," he said, and she held out her left wrist, the one that had been wrapped and rewrapped over the past 2 weeks, healed now to the point where she had stopped favoring it, and he took the bracelet and opened the invisible clasp and settled it around her wrist and closed it. His fingers stayed on the bracelet for a moment after the clasp was secured, just resting there, and she looked at his hands on her wrist and thought about all the times those hands had been there in one context or another over the past 2 weeks. The first wrapping in the night she did not remember. The careful redressing at the kitchen island. The training room and the holds and the 4 attempts before she got free. Hands capable of a very wide range of things, which had shown her most of that range and had been consistently, in every application, exactly as present as the moment required. "You're not the woman who hid in a bathroom," he said. His voice was quiet and direct and not dressed up in anything extra. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever he tries, that is the thing to remember. Everyone who looks at you tomorrow is going to see exactly that. Not what he spent 8 months trying to make you into. What you actually are." Danica looked at him. The studio light fell across both of them and the empty room held the silence of a space that had recently contained something real and still carried the impression of it. She thought about the bathroom floor and the cold tiles and the wrong number and the 43 floors and the training room and the 12 days of work and the pilot light that had turned back into a fire, and she thought about the fact that she was standing in this room in a building she had once tried every door of looking for an exit and was not looking for an exit anymore. She reached up and held his face in both hands. His jaw was warm under her palms and she felt the slight tension in it, the controlled quality that ran through everything about him, present even now, except at the edges where she could feel it not quite holding. She kissed him slowly. Not with urgency, not with the energy of the hallway at midnight which had been about decision and relief and finally. This was something quieter and more deliberate, the kind of kiss that is not moving toward anything because it has already arrived. He kissed her back with both hands coming to rest at her sides, steady and present, and the studio was very quiet around them and the city outside was beginning its evening and neither of them said anything else because there was nothing left to say that the next 12 hours would not answer better than words could. The Meridian Gallery was exactly what Hyun-sik had described and more than she had let herself picture. It occupied the ground floor and mezzanine of a converted building whose bones were industrial and whose current skin was the kind of considered renovation that keeps the height and raw materials and replaces everything else with intention. Original timber and steel in the ceilings. Pale stone floors. The lighting designed specifically for painted work and showing hers the way the studio skylight had shown it during the making of it, honestly and without flattery, which was the only way she had ever wanted her work seen. She arrived 30 minutes before the opening with Park, who wore a dark suit, spoke only when necessary, and delivered her to the gallery's back entrance with the efficiency of someone for whom logistics were a first language. Danica had put the amber dress on in the studio that morning and stood in front of the mirror for a long time. Not with the critical inventory she usually performed before any public appearance, checking for things that needed correcting. Just looking. Brown skin warm under the color of the dress, dark curling hair down and loose around her shoulders the way she wore it when she was not performing anything, the bracelet on her left wrist catching the bathroom light in small shifting pieces. She had looked like herself. More completely like herself than she had looked in 2 years. The 4 canvases were hung on the east and north walls of the main gallery space and they were right. That was the only word she had for it when she saw them in context for the first time. Right in the way a sentence is right when every word is the correct one and the rhythm is correct and the meaning is exactly what you meant. The gallery's lighting did what she had trusted it to do. The space between the pieces was correct. Someone had understood the work. By the time the doors opened and the first guests arrived, she had stood in front of each canvas one more time and said goodbye to the private versions of them, the versions that had lived in the studio with the skylight and the doorway where Hyun-sik sat with his book in the evenings. They were public now. They belonged to anyone who looked at them. The room filled. The cultural press came with their cameras and recorders and specific vocabulary for talking about painted work, and she heard fragments of it as she moved through the space, words that told her the work was being received the way honest work gets received when it reaches people who know how to look. She was not performing tonight. That was the thing she kept returning to as person after person found her and told her what the paintings had done to them. She was not managing herself or monitoring her own edges or calculating the distance between who she was and who it was safe to appear to be. She was simply there, in the amber dress, with the bracelet on her wrist, and the room was responding to the fact of her presence the way rooms respond to something real. Hyun-sik communicated through the bracelet. Not through an earpiece, she had declined that. It felt like too much of someone else in her head when she needed her head to be her own. He had accepted that and adjusted, which meant he sent vibrations to the bracelet in pre-agreed patterns. 2 vibrations meant he was in position. 3 meant be ready. 1 meant look toward the entrance. At 42 minutes the bracelet gave a single vibration. She was speaking to a press photographer near the second canvas when she felt it, and she did not change her expression or her posture or the pace of the conversation. She finished the sentence she was on and looked toward the entrance in the natural way a person looks when new guests arrive. Ellis Vance had dressed for a room he intended to own. Dark suit, good cut, the particular confidence of a man who has prepared for an occasion by deciding in advance that it belongs to him. He stood at the entrance and scanned the gallery with the methodical attention she recognized from every room she had ever watched him enter. His eyes found her within seconds. Across the room and through 20 people he found her immediately, which told her she was the first thing he had looked for, which told her everything about the nature of his attendance tonight. He did not approach immediately. He took a glass from a passing tray and moved through the room with the performance of a man attending a cultural event for its own sake, pausing in front of the third canvas for a period that she understood was not about the painting. He was watching her in his peripheral vision while appearing to look at the work. She had learned to identify the skill after 2 years of being watched by it. She moved through the room and waited. The corridor to the storage access ran behind the north wall of the gallery, accessible through an unmarked door propped open for the caterers. She went through it 20 minutes after Ellis arrived because the conversation she was in had naturally ended near that door, and because moving away from a crowded room toward a quieter space was something a person might plausibly do after 40 minutes of sustained social attention. Plausibility was important. She had gone 15 feet down the corridor when she heard the door open behind her. She did not turn around. She heard his footsteps and counted them, and then heard the door close, and the sound of the main room became muffled, and it was just the corridor, pale walls, overhead fluorescent light, 2 camera housings mounted at the junctions with the adjoining corridors that Ellis would not have noticed because they were the same color as the ceiling. "You look well," Ellis said. She turned then. He was standing 8 feet away, blocking the door back to the gallery, his glass gone, his right hand holding his phone with the screen facing her. "Considering," he said, "that everything you've built is about to be formally dismantled." She looked at the phone. The arrest warrant was on the screen, her name at the top, the charges the familiar ones, the signature at the bottom belonging to a judge she now knew was connected to Ellis's brother the way everything Ellis used was connected to something he had gotten to first. The document looked complete and official and designed to produce a specific physical response in her, the collapse of posture, the shrinking that he had trained her body to perform over 2 years of careful and patient work. She felt none of it. "There are 2 officers at the side exit," he said. "We're going to walk out together, and this is going to look like a voluntary departure. Or I walk you out of your own opening in handcuffs and every camera in that room gets the image." He took 1 step toward her. "Your choice." "Like always." Danica looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the man who had built a legal case from inside a relationship and filmed her sister from a car and filed a licensing review designed to take 14 months and said like always with the complete confidence of someone who had never once considered that she might have spent the past 2 weeks learning what to do with 1 second of surprise. She moved into him instead of away, and her weight was on the front third of both feet, and she rotated around his reaching hand before it landed, and her right hand found his wrist at the angle Hyun-sik had shown her, the geometry she had practiced until it lived in her body rather than just in her understanding, and she applied the pressure in the direction that the joint did not travel, and his wrist gave with a sound that was smaller than she expected, and his phone hit the corridor floor and his composure went with it, all 3 in the order she had intended, and she stepped back and stood in the space she had made for herself and looked at him folded over his own wrist, making sounds she had never heard from him before. Then she looked up at the camera at the corridor junction and stepped further back so the angle was clean. Hyun-sik came through the corridor door 40 seconds after Ellis hit the floor. Not running. Walking at the pace he always walked, the pace of someone who has already accounted for every variable and is simply moving through the plan rather than reacting to it. Behind him came a man and a woman, both in dark clothing, and behind them a third person she recognized from federal press coverage she had read during the weeks of legal research, a woman with short gray hair and a prosecutor's posture who was not Ellis Vance and was therefore, tonight, exactly what the room needed. Danica had stepped back against the corridor wall and stayed there while the people positioned for this specific moment moved into their positions around Ellis, who was still bent over his wrist making the sounds of a man encountering his own physical limits for the first time. The woman with the gray hair looked at Ellis with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for a particular file to become actionable and has just watched it become actionable in a corridor at a gallery opening. The two plainclothes officers Ellis had positioned at the side exit had been intercepted before Danica had even gone through the corridor door. She found that out later. Hyun-sik's people had reached them first, had shown them documentation that reframed the evening's legal landscape in terms that made Ellis's instructions not only invalid but actively dangerous to follow, and both officers had made the calculation that a prosecutor whose authority was being federally reviewed was not worth the career consequence of a false arrest on camera. They had left through the side exit alone. Ellis was taken out through the same door. Not in handcuffs immediately, that came later, but with a hand on each arm and the federal agent walking beside him reading from a list of charges in the same flat professional tone you would use for a grocery list. Evidence fabrication. Abuse of prosecutorial authority. Witness intimidation. 6 additional counts that Hyun-sik's people had been building in parallel with everything else, assembled from the same patient and methodical attention that had produced the corridor cameras and the bracelet and the timing of the press coverage and the specific choice of the Meridian Gallery as the location where all of it came together. The list was long enough that Ellis had stopped making sounds about his wrist by the time it was finished. He was listening. His face had the gray quality she had seen once before, the night Hyun-sik had spoken to him in her apartment. The color of a man who has fully understood the dimensions of something he walked into. He looked at her once before they took him through the side exit. Just once, a look that she received without flinching, and she looked back at him with the stillness she had learned from watching Hyun-sik absorb things that would have moved a less practiced person, and then the door closed and Ellis Vance was no longer in the building. The gallery on the other side of the north wall continued its evening. She could hear it through the wall, the murmur of conversation, the movement of people through a space, the specific alive sound of a room full of people looking at work that was asking something of them. She stood in the corridor and listened to it, and then she straightened the amber dress and went back through the door. She stayed for another hour. The ease was real, the particular lightness of a body that has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just put it down. She stood in front of her own paintings with a glass of water and felt the same subtle recognition she had felt in the studio. People came to her and the conversations were real because she was entirely present in a way she had not been in public for 2 years. The press photographer found her again near the first canvas and took a photograph that she would see later and barely recognize herself in, not because she looked different but because she looked so completely like herself that it read almost as a stranger. Park came to her side at 10:45 and said the car was ready when she was in. Danica said her goodbyes to the gallery director and to 2 people from the press who had asked for follow-up conversations she agreed to without the caveat of checking with anyone first, because there was no longer anyone whose reaction she needed to pre-calculate. The car was the same one from the morning, dark and quiet, tinted windows. Hyun-sik was already inside, sitting in the same position she had first seen him in a car, eyes forward, hands on his knees. She got in beside him and Park closed the door and the city began moving past the windows in long amber streaks. She could feel the absence of the tension she had been carrying since the corridor, not a collapse into relief, just an absence, the way a sound you have stopped hearing only becomes noticeable once the silence arrives. They rode without speaking for several minutes. She could see the bracelet in the passing light, the hammered gold catching and releasing the amber of streetlights. Hyun-sik spoke without turning his head from the window. He was placed in a federal transport vehicle at 11:17, he said. His voice was the voice he used for information, even and without inflection. 51 minutes later the vehicle was involved in a collision on the interstate connector. A cargo truck running without plates entered the interchange from the wrong direction. He paused for the length of one breath. There were no survivors among the detainees. Danica looked at the window. The city moved past in its organized amber light. She sat with what he had just told her and let it exist in the car between them without immediately deciding what to do with it. She checked for horror the way she had learned to check for things honestly over the past several weeks, without telling herself in advance what she was supposed to find. She found nothing that resembled horror. She found the same cold thing that had arrived with the 40-second video and had lived in her chest for the past 2 weeks, and she found it dissolving, not dramatically, just steadily, the way ice dissolves in a room that has finally reached the right temperature. She thought about the soft edges on the legal papers. the bruise on her wrist that had taken 2 weeks to fade. Zoe walking to her car with her head down, unaware of the camera 12 feet away. She sat with all of it for a long and honest moment, and then she turned from the window and looked at Hyun-sik, who was looking at her now, waiting with the patience that was not performed patience but the real thing. "Take me back to the studio," she said. He held her gaze for a moment, and she watched something in his expression settle into a kind of quiet that was different from his usual quiet, softer in a way that did not make him look less like himself but more, as if the controlled surface had been set aside because the person underneath it was sufficient. He said something to Park in Korean. The car changed direction at the next intersection. Danica looked back at the window and watched the city rearrange itself around a new destination and felt the pilot light in her chest that had become a fire over 12 days of work and had not gone out through an evening of everything the opening had required, burning the way real fires burn, steadily, with something left to give. The studio was exactly as she had left it the morning before. Work table clean, brushes in their jars, the easel at the angle she had set it to during the last day of work on the 4th canvas. She had changed out of the amber dress in the bedroom and put on the clothes she worked in, an old shirt with paint already in the fabric from 12 days of honest use, and came to the studio and stood in the doorway the way she had stood in it on the first morning, checking for the pilot light. It was there. More than there. The evening had fed it rather than taking from it, the corridor and the corridor cameras and the car ride and what Hyun-sik had told her in the car, all of it gone into the fire, and what was burning now was larger and hotter and more certain than anything she had felt since before Ellis. Possibly before that. She went in. She did not plan what she was going to make. She pulled the largest canvas remaining from the stack against the wall and set it on the easel and stood in front of it and let the blankness ask its question. She had always believed that a blank canvas was not empty. It was a question with a specific shape and a specific set of possible answers, and the job was to find the one that was true. She stood in front of this one, and the answer came almost immediately, not as a thought but as a physical impulse, a direction her hand wanted to move, a color her eye was already mixing from the tubes on the work table. She picked up a brush and began. What came out was not the work she had made before Ellis. That work had been honest and she did not regret it, and it was on the walls of the Meridian Gallery tonight doing what she had made it to do, but it was the work of a person who was still in possession of most of herself. The work she had made before Ellis was good. This was something else. This had the quality that only comes from a person who has been to the bottom of something and come back up knowing the exact depth of it, who carries that knowledge in the body now, not as information but as experience, as a thing that has been carried and set down and carried again and finally understood. She worked in dark colors first, not because the painting was going to be dark but because the foundation of it was. Deep blue-black across the lower 2/3, applied with a wide brush and strokes moving from left to right and slightly upward, not smooth, not decorative, the texture of something that had weight and had been moved through rather than avoided. She let it sit for the time it needed and then came back with the color that had been waiting since she picked up the first brush, a warm and complicated amber, not quite gold and not quite brown, and she brought it in from the upper right in a wide and generous movement that crossed the dark ground without covering it, the two colors meeting and in places moving into each other in ways she had not planned and did not correct because they were right. She worked for a long time. The city outside the skylight went through its late-night changes and she was aware of it in the peripheral way she was always aware of time passing when she worked, as a texture in the background rather than a measurement. The painting grew the way true ones always grew, not according to a plan but according to its own internal logic, each mark generating the question that the next mark answered. Hyun-sik came to the doorway. She heard him arrive and felt his presence settle into its familiar position at the edge of the room without needing to turn around to confirm it. There was no book tonight. She could tell from the quality of his silence that he was watching rather than reading, and she let herself be watched the way she had let the gallery look at her work tonight, without managing it, without monitoring the distance between what was visible and what she wanted visible, because there was no longer a gap between those two things to manage. She painted. He watched. The night moved around both of them and the canvas became what it was going to be. At some point the skylight changed. It was the subtlest shift, the difference between darkness that belongs entirely to night and darkness that is beginning to consider becoming something else, a gray quality entering the black at the edges of the glass above her, the city outside starting its slowest and most private transition. She had seen this light before, had worked through to it on nights when the work demanded it. She made the last mark. She knew it was the last one the way she always knew, not because the painting was complete and closed but because it had arrived at the place where it was true, where anything added would be addition rather than discovery. She lowered the brush and stood back as far as the studio allowed and looked at what the night had made through her hands. It was the best thing she had ever done. She knew it with the same quiet certainty she had known the 4 canvases were ready, but larger, more settled. The recognition of something that had required everything she had been through to be possible and could not have existed without any part of it. Not the Ellis part or the bathroom floor part or the legal papers. Not even the 12 days of work or the training room or the hallway at midnight. All of it. The whole of it had gone into the ground of this painting and the amber had come up through it, and the two things together were something that had no name except true. She heard Hyun-sik cross the studio floor. His footsteps on the rubber matting were quiet and even, and she did not turn around as he came to stand beside her and look at the canvas. He stood there for a long moment looking at it, and she stood beside him and looked at it too. Then he took the brush from her hand gently and set it on the work table beside her. She turned to look at him, and his face in the gray pre-dawn light from the skylight was the most open she had seen it, all the controlled surfaces set aside, the person underneath them present and unheld. He reached into the pocket of his shirt and took out a small box. Dark wood, no markings, smaller than the one the bracelet had come in. He opened it and held it toward her. The ring was dark gold, not bright, not yellow, but the deep warm tone of gold that has been worked and aged, set with a single black stone at the center that sat in the band like something inevitable, like it had always been there and the band had simply grown up around it. Around the black stone ran a border of small gems in deep amber, the color of the dress, the color of the painting's warmth moving through the dark ground, the color she now associated with the specific quality of being seen by someone who had been paying attention long before you knew they were there. She looked at the ring and then she looked at him. "I'm not offering you a rescue," he said. His voice was quiet and without the operational quality she associated with his plans and decisions. This was the voice from the hallway at midnight. The one that did not manage itself. You don't need one. You never did. What I'm offering you is a counterpart. Someone who is on your side with everything that means in my world, which is not a small thing and not a clean thing, but it is a complete thing. He held her gaze without shifting. I will burn down every structure that was ever used against you. Not because you can't do it yourself. Because you shouldn't have to do it alone. And because I have been waiting for the right person to build something better with, and I am not willing to keep waiting now that I know who that is. Danica looked at the ring in the box he was holding and thought about the 4 paintings on the meridian walls and the blank canvas she had just filled and the brush he had taken from her hand and the bracelet on her wrist and the wrong number she had dialed in a dark bathroom on a night that had turned out to be not an accident at all but a direction she had not known she was already moving in. She said yes the way she painted. Without reservation, without calculation, with her whole self committed to the mark before the brush even touched the surface. He put the ring on her finger and it fit the way the dress had fit, like something made with specific knowledge, and she held her hand up in the gray pre-dawn light and looked at the black stone and the amber border catching the first suggestion of morning. They went to the main room when the light through the windows had turned from gray to the pale gold of early day, the city below beginning its morning with the organized efficiency she had watched from this height many times now and had come to find not cold but clarifying. Hyun-sik stood beside her with his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into the solid weight of him and looked at the city coming alive 43 floors below and felt the particular quality of a morning that is the first morning of something rather than the continuation of what came before. She thought about Zoe, who could come home now. She thought about the studio behind them and the wet canvas on the easel and the 12 days of work on the meridian walls and the amber dress hanging in the bedroom and the bracelet still on her left wrist beside the ring on her finger. She thought about a bathroom floor and a wrong number and a man who had walked through her door with the unhurried certainty of someone arriving at a place they had always been moving toward. Danica Rose stood at the window of a building she no longer wanted to leave and watched the city begin its day and understood with the same clean certainty she brought to the last mark on a true painting that she was not surviving anymore. The surviving was finished. What she was doing now, what she was standing inside of with the ring on her hand and the fire still burning in her chest and the whole of the city spread below her like a question she was no longer afraid to answer, was something else entirely. Something that had no name yet except beginning, and beginning, she had always known, was the best possible place to be. And that is where we leave Danica Rowe. Not rescued. Not broken. Chosen, and choosing back. If this story taught us anything, it is that the wrong number is sometimes the most right thing that ever happens to you, and that healing does not always look the way we were told it would. If this story moved you, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what you felt, and subscribe to Arden Tells Tales because there is so much more coming.